So there's lots of like this sort of pseudo-militaristic language that you see in Buddhist texts, and it's all referring to the real enemies that are conquered by the high ones, by the advanced ones. And those enemies, we talked about those enemies last night here. Those enemies are what we call your mental afflictions. Mental afflictions. Comes from a Sanskrit word. The Sanskrit word for mental affliction is klesha, which comes from a Sanskrit root klish, which actually brings us a couple of interesting English words. You can kind of remember it maybe. Klesha is related to the English word holly. The ka goes to ha, holly, which is kind of prickly, right? Kind of prickly. It causes us a little pain when we feel it. Here's another one, calamity. Our kleshas are calamities, right? Kleshas means mental affliction, means, definition, anything that disturbs the peace of your mind. Anything that upsets your happiness is a klesha. So how many kleshas have you had today, do you think? When was the last klesha you had? 3 seconds ago. Probably not even that long, okay? All the time. All the time. There's always something wrong. Always something wrong. We're never happy, actually. When the Buddha said life is suffering, he really meant that. He didn't mean like some of the time, or when things aren't going right. He meant all the time life is suffering. Because all the time there's some klesha. It's too hot, it's too cold, the mosquitoes, he's going on too long. I don't want him ever to stop. And he might stop sometime. Some mental afflictions going off all the time. So the victors are the ones who have conquered their mental afflictions. They have become the boss of themselves. Right? Like the kids say, the boss of me. They become the boss of themselves. And they have conquered anger, for example. We were talking about anger last night. They've conquered anger. They never get angry anymore. Can you imagine how much happier you'd be if you never got angry anymore? I mean, just that one. They say, how many kleshas are there, 84,000, they say. In the text, they say 84,000. 84,000 means gajillion. That's an ancient Indian way of saying, we can't count them all, there's so many. 84,000. So, just conquering one, like anger, would make a huge difference in our lives. Just never to get angry again. Imagine. Wouldn't that be great? And that's possible. It's totally possible. But we have to work at it. We have to understand that, first and foremost, that the mental afflictions are not our little friends. I used to be a smoker, and when you're a smoker, you hang around with other smokers. So when I used to hang around with a friend of mine, and we smoked together. And he used to call cigarettes his little friends. It's really funny. So like, you have any little friends? I'm out of my little friends. Why'd you call them little friends? I said, what is that? He says, no, they're always with you. When you're happy, you can just light up, and when you're sad, light up. You can, after a dinner, you can light up. You're hungry, you can light up. After you've eaten, you can light up. They're always with you, little friends. And your mental afflictions are exactly like cigarettes, actually. They're not your little friends. They're killing you. They're killing your happiness. And so think of them that way. So the victors are the ones who've they've conquered their mental afflictions. I'll tell you the 3 main ones, okay? Anger actually didn't make the top 3. Anger's kind of a version of one of the top 3, I have to say. So the first and foremost one, for those of you who are here this week, you'll know, it's ignorance. Ignorance is thinking that things are happening in ways that they're not. So, for example, thinking that it's someone else's fault that you're unhappy. That's deep-seated ignorance. That it's somebody else's fault. Or that somebody else has the power to make you happy or unhappy is ignorance. It's just ignorance. So that's key. That was key. And we'll talk more about that on Sunday, Saturday night and Sunday. We'll have 2 classes on what constitutes wisdom, which is the opposite of ignorance. Correct view, we call it. That's the third of the 3 principal paths. Correct view. Understanding what's what, you could say. So ignorance. And then the 2 that derive from ignorance, the 2 main ones that derive from ignorance, are something they call them desire and hatred. So that sounds pretty heavy, actually. desire. Like, desire is pretty heavy, right? How often do we have desire? Maybe once a couple times a day. Desire, really desire, right? And hatred or anger, that's also pretty heavy. But so we have to maybe find better words for those, because they're not talking about something that happened once in a while. They're talking about something that's with us pretty much all the time. So my teacher has suggested the translations, these translations. For raga and dvesha, for those of you who know the Sanskrit, raga means, some kind of desire. Ignorant liking and ignorant disliking. Ignorant liking and ignorant disliking. And then there's ignorance itself. And those three are with us all the time. Ignorant liking means thinking that, among other things, it means thinking that likable things are likable from their own side. Thinking that likable things have some kind of intrinsic likability to them. That's the ignorant part. So, let's take an example of that. Is Ben & Jerry's ice cream inherently likable?
Yes.
Well, it depends on the flavor. I'm not suckered in. I'm not going to be suckered into that. Because now maybe there's some Ben & Jerry's ice cream that I've not yet tasted that is not that good. There's several proofs that there's nothing inherently likable about Ben & Jerry's ice cream. That's one that you just mentioned. That some people eat Ben & Jerry's ice cream and get sick from it if they have some kind of condition. Other people actually don't like Ben & Jerry's ice cream. They said, no, I like Haagen-Dazs, or I don't like ice cream at all, or something like that. Do they still have Haagen-Dazs? Yeah. Poor Haagen-Dazs. That used to be the designer ice cream, remember? You know this? So, so they don't like Ben & Jerry's ice cream. So does that mean that they're wrong? That